another disc guidance segment with the 2MK team. Today we are looking at the newest iteration form of our Dragon Ball FighterZ bot. It is as yet unnamed because it actually covers so many things. It is a little difficult to decide what exactly to say it is the focus for. However, as we'll be giving you the disc guidance itself, there should be at least somewhat clarity on what it is to do. Hopefully, it'll be clear regardless of the fact that you have to come up with a proper name yet. Now, in short, you realize that a lot of the time, the instinctive spacings that this game presents to you based on how far away you are versus how far away you have to move in order to land a hit seems to be a little off compared to most games. There are a lot of relatively safe moves, some strange pushback on certain other moves, and a lot of lunging attacks that are somewhat required in order to land things that you want. Therefore, while it seems relatively easy at first, like you just hit buttons and things happen, this hasn't been the actual way it turned out. So, you're getting to see the definition and the demonstration of what I'm talking about now. There are some characters, like Hit, who actually have that much range. And this is part of the point of having Hit as part of this bot. Basically, a character who can hit you with their standing mid-attack from basically half screen. Quickly pointing out just how inferior, if you're not playing Hit himself, your own stand medium probably is. For some characters it's easier than others, but obviously in order to demonstrate this, we've got lots of characters available. In this case, Gotenks, who has very short, Vegeta, who is deceptively far for most standards, and Cell, who is relatively well known and fairly easy to figure out. Just generally though, you can assume that your primary aims are going to be based around that. But when I say primary, I don't necessarily mean the ones I mentioned first, because the way it flows means you change around the difficulties based on certain things, and as a result, they don't always get described in the exact form or order that you might expect from that. So in the interest of making this clear, since nearly everyone already has a quote-unquote bot, this doesn't require any changes to inputs, and basically can be used in more or less the same way as every other, even down to nuances of action. You don't need to turn on or off anything relative to the norm. And you can just use the standard settings of 100% on nearly everything, except our action 3, which is as standard, set to 50%. One of your first goals, one of your primary goals, let's put it that way. Your primary goal here is to hit your stand medium. Generally you want to do it in neutral or having this back dash out of, or in some cases, with punish style, where the opponent has hit some button that moves them very slightly forward. You know you have enough time to hit the stand medium, so you hit it. The difficulty in this is actually somewhat executional, in that the more stressed you become, the more likely it is that you'll tap forward in order to move closer in order to do this, and hit the medium before releasing forward, which will cause you to be able to move altogether. This is fairly important And it will help you with this, even if you pretty much understand everything else about it. You can still use it to make yourself more capable of doing that when needed. One of the second things you will notice is that since action 5 is on and action 7 is also on, you're going to get a lot of space where the opponent is standing in front of you and goes for, let's say, crouch heavy, or does something punishable. So before we go into that in full, having just shown you a taste of what it does, at the end of this interaction, you'll change some of the characters, or at least change one of the characters, and maybe set up a couple of other settings relative to game settings, sound, and so on, before we go into the rest of the stream. Since this particular theme is louder than most, and it may be better for this particular thing if you shift it around. And we're about to change to Bardock, who, while not the noisiest, definitely makes enough sound at particular times as to potentially make it difficult to hear. But as you can see, the team in question are currently Hit, Goku Blue, and Team Gohan. In this case, we'll be changing Goku Blue to Bardock and demonstrating why that might be important, and talking a bit about mental structures based on this and so on. Since your goal is basically to hit with 5M and to punish when you have the big chance to do so with 5H, there's really not that much more that you need to do, but since the bot is about spacing and not about defense, which you probably should and could work on someplace different, we do have one or two other things to look at. Even though these are a bit more minor. The first is that these characters use their supers quite often, and a lot of them have either interesting pushback, or could be done from so far away that you can't be absolutely sure if you should go for the punish or not, or in what way you should do so. And since this is not about where you get other points from being in their face, and you don't know when they're going to super, you don't necessarily want to be in their face. Meaning we can just give you points for recognizing your situation relative to that. Therefore, any punish at all on any super used will count as a point here. This obviously depends on your character. Some characters find it easy to do this, some find it hard, but the important thing is generally to get this punish. Now, at the higher levels of difficulty, Vanish will be disallowed as a punish because 1, it doesn't do that much damage, and you should learn to do something better. And 2, in most situations where you want to do this, you have better options. The final point is related to the amount of corner carry this team has. Even when they're not necessarily doing that much, there's always a quick chance of you ending up in the corner against them. Regardless of what else is going on, really. This is slightly less true with Bardock, because Bardock is a very forward-moving character, but we'll get back to him and that in the subsections of this in a bit. Overall though, just remember that the last point, and one that you will keep all the way through, is that if you have been knocked down in the corner, get out without counter-attacking. You can block for as long as you want, but that's the condition. You have been knocked down in the corner, you're on your back, and all you have to do is get out without being hit and without counter-attacking yourself to set it up. Deflecting is fine. I guess you can Vanish if you want to get this point, but if you're going to be doing that, you probably want to set your meter to 0 as standard rather than 1, because you are allowed to generally set it to whatever you want. But you generally want to set it to 0 in order to make this actually challenging if you intend to use the Vanish. This is technically a relatively easy point to get in some cases for some characters, and for others it can be hard. The point is more so awareness and spacing, more so than any given thing intended to be super difficult. This is a lot closer to our katas from the Street Fighter side than it is to actual bots. But this team can be difficult enough to cause this sort of problem. The way that they become difficult, however, is in the additional conditions and enemy groups that you'll fight. Obviously, Bardock is not available to everyone, but fortunately, he's not all that required either. Bardock is primarily useful when you as a player are impatient and like to press buttons to get out of trouble but hate blocking. So we may have more views of Bardock later on in the stream. But for now, we're just demonstrating the fact that for the most part, if your defenses are strong, he's not that threatening. His supers aren't too misleading, his assist is relatively linear, his ranges and buttons are long. But, I mean, you're already fighting hit. At that point, you really don't have to care. The only other thing that changes is that he's a little bit more likely to Dragon Rush because something about his rhythm relative to other characters is different. But even this is very difficult to notice, as he's usually just pressuring and offensively attacking you like most other times. But it is still true that if you have DLC characters available and Bardock is among them, and you know for sure that you are an impatient person who does not like to block out to the end of stuff in this game, he's probably the better option for your opponent in neutral. Now if this seems as if it would be super easy, fear not. After all, our bots tend to have upper levels of difficulty to adapt to once you've gotten yourself up to speed. Because simply saying, well, hit withstand medium, anyone can just hit withstand medium. While that is not specifically true, as they actually are quite strong in preventing it one way or another, and you do have to react, yes, it is true that one could mostly mash it and hope that things work out, and it might still matter. But of course, as always, your team cannot faint, you cannot lose all three of your characters. But for this bot, you can't even lose two. You are failed as soon as your second character falls. Similarly, this is another one of those bots where you have failed where your opponent's second character falls. This is actually fairly standard for these bots because it removes assists and a lot of layers of the gameplay. You can do your best to make sure this does not cause you to build up any really bad habits regarding using your Dragon Rush to throw your opponent out. Fortunately, this is actually easier to do against this team than hitting them with Stand Medium, interestingly. Because it goes in the same space as the Stand Heavy, and you mostly can just block them for a long time. The stress and difficulty of dealing with this team is more so about making sure that you hit them at particular timings, rather than how hard it is to defend against them. This is particularly true because Bardock is living. And there are quite a lot that will hit a couple jabs. If you did the auto combo in action 3 a little faster, it still shouldn't cause too many problems. It'll cause them to stick to you a little better, but it's probably not an issue. The main thing is that as we go on here, you'll see more and more of the demo involving making sure that once that Stand Medium has hit, comboing into either Crouch Heavy if you're close, Stand Heavy if you're not as close, and sometimes even Stand Special or Crouch Special depending on the character if you're Heavy missed altogether, or if the Stand Medium in question. Clip them while they're in the air, which does come up fairly often. Depending on how you react to the characters, they will also super dash a bit more than other bots because they lack certain moves in the air. Meaning, most characters who have no air version of a move at all will be unable to do a super even if they do what is the equivalent of the super motion while in the air with the buttons. This is more likely to mean that they will go for an air Dragon Rush, but that's a lower chance, or they will super dash. There are also other situations that will cause them to super dash a bit more, such as the timings related to hits, counter moves, and just some property of Team Gohan that we're not even clear on. As a result, therefore, while this is not a part of the point system, one of your goals should be that if you are far enough away that reacting to a super dash is possible, you really want to try to do that whenever you can. But of course, this is all useless to you if you don't have Bardock and don't intend to buy him, because it's not clear what you should do in the opposite situation. Most of us can get access to Goku Blue through just money, but let's change from Bardock to regular Super Saiyan Goku. In this case, he will count as literally the poor man's solution to this situation. But that doesn't mean that he's no help at all. In fact, he can be particularly useful for, once again, a certain specific type of player. Whenever your character has relatively shorter stand medium, or even shorter stand heavy, and has to travel more distance forward in order to get to where they need to go to be effective, the additional pushback and risk of having to deal with the beams can make your life a bit harder. So, for Vegeta and Gotenks as shown here, this is at least equal in many ways to most of the things available when picking Goku Blue. Blue forces you to deal with more of Hit's mix-ups and some stuff from King Gohan, but in terms of the core function of the bot, and not getting stressed out because the mix-ups are more complicated, Super Saiyan Goku does just fine. One of the more important things and more difficult things as a result is being able to recognize when the opponent cannot use particular assists because they've recently called them. Assists are one of the most dangerous things in stopping you from getting this sort of offense going. Meaning that once you've recognized the assists have both been used, it usually implies you've got a free hit coming. And you have a certain amount of timer before you have at risk of being hit by assist again. This changes according to which character is closest because of the behaviors. For Gohan, it matters more than to the others. But given Goku's behavior, we do have one more thing to demonstrate. If you are picking Goku, it can be to your benefit to turn off Action 5. He doesn't really gain that much from it, and the other two don't need it that much. It causes them to stay in the air more, which actually makes their life harder in a lot of ways. But they also stay relatively strong at what they're trying to do either way. Hit will counter less, but do more moves as a result. Super dash slightly more, and generally cause you a bit more or less trouble in various directions. If you don't feel like dealing with hit mix-ups and want some time to figure it out, regardless of if you're using Goku or not, You should leave Action 5 on until you're used to it. But once you're used to the bot, you probably want to turn it off, especially if you're using regular Super Saiyan Goku. So for the time being, we're looking at Goku, simply because it is actually slightly more difficult for Vegeta and Gotenks to deal with this. Cell is more able to handle it because of his larger amounts of free movement. But in terms of actually achieving the goal of hitting, we stand medium. Cell isn't that much better off, and he's relatively slower, but being relatively slower doesn't mean that it's better to use Goku specifically, because slower characters often have other tools to deal with the situation, longer stand heavy, longer stand medium in some cases, and so on. Since by most inputs of Action 5, Goku will not really do too many regular Kamehameha, and of course you could, as mentioned, turn it off, it's not a strong concern for you in terms of getting in position, except when he's being used as an assist. Overall, use this bot to recognize that spacing where you tend to feel, okay, it's time for my stand medium, and realize too often you're wrong, you get hurt. Or, if you find you constantly have that feeling, my stand medium was first, it should have hit, and you didn't actually know whether or not you were close enough or in the correct spacing for it to hit you quickly. Additional things we have learned are that the way that the supers start up for these characters tends to make them easily deflectable, and you can use it to become more comfortable with the idea of just deflecting certain supers. Not necessarily from close, but you can try it out and find that you're managing it in situations you didn't expect.
I will say that for this bot, some characters can use its ice on the floor attack to get a relatively quick and easy way of figuring out when exactly they are close enough to do their medium. It's not a perfect measure, but when I was first starting out trying this, using that as sort of my guidepost for where the opponent could still control space and yet I still have the ability to hit was useful for me.
In addition, Gohan's ranges for certain moves, which he's less likely to use, have similar outputs in terms of you realizing, oh, he has this here, he has this here, I should or should not do this thing. He's the easiest of the three to whiff punish, but if you misread him, he often does a lot of damage. Even the effort of trying to drag and rush the opponent so you can throw them out and keep them alive longer will also help you recognize spacings and similar things for a lot of situations. But overall, just note that if you have no other options, you can't use Goku Blue, and you can't use Bardock, regular Super Saiyan Goku does a good job. Base Goku does not do a good job. Please do not use him for this particular thing, even if you happen to have him as DLC and not his father. But let's change characters a bit and go back to demonstrating Goku Blue, but we're also going to demonstrate what happens when your character has longer normals, so we're going to have Gotenks switched out for Nappa. Nappa is slower, less mobile, but he also has longer options in a lot of situations. And we're going to see what trade-off that causes when using the bot with Goku Blue specifically. If you do not have him available for whatever reason, even if you have Bardock somehow, you should probably still use regular Super Saiyan Goku while using characters like Nappa. But if you can use Goku Blue in the situation where you have a character like Nappa who is generally not necessarily armored, but a big body that has some ways through some things, or some extra options, or some really long buttons, it's Goku Blue that you want, and we'll show you why in this part. So remembering our goals here, hit 5M, and at higher levels convert into heavy, special, something. Hit 5H, depending on when your opponent has done certain things and left himself really open. Punish their supers. There's really no specific conditions on this, although later on you don't really want to use your Vanish for it. You can use Vanish to avoid it, but that's not a point, so you don't care. Feel free to do that however much you want though. That's still good practice to have. And finally, when you've been knocked down in the corner, get out of the corner without counter-attacking. You're free to deflect, you're free to jump out, you're free to use any of your actual mobility tools, even the Vanish, although again, you might want to lower your meter or make it so that the Vanish is not something you rely on when you're doing the higher difficulty levels and so on, as a whole to make it a little harder on yourself. As always, we're demonstrating the bots with Sparking Blast set differently than normal. They will recharge after a bit. Generally, when you're counting, you don't want to do this. If you realize that you're not necessarily good enough at it to bother counting, then sure, turn on the Sparking so you have more time to learn. You can use it as much as you want. Which is basically the same thing we're doing here. Demonstrations, have Sparking evolve, we use them to change up things, but we also mostly try to switch out when needed. Goku Blue is helpful because he has just as many left-right mix-ups as Hit does under most circumstances. Specifically, since the setting for the meter for the bot is at 1, you should generally have access to his EX versions of certain attacks, meaning that he will constantly be flying to either side of you. But one of his most important traits in this is the fact that he can both use a counter-style move and a dive kick style assist, which makes it really difficult to keep up with the other two on the team. It's hard enough to deal with spacing yourself correctly to deal with the opponent when you can see where your opponent is. Adding Goku Blue to this generally changes the entire flow of how much you can see and count on being visible, and forces you to spend even more time watching for the assist timings.
Yes, I would say out of the 3 recommended bot pairings, if you are looking to train awareness, I find Goku Blue to be the most taxing on your awareness. He just adds up the left-right mix-ups a lot more, and as Jimmy was saying, the assist on him has a lot more synergy than the other two, I feel. It makes it so that you have to pay extra attention, especially if, say, Hit is putting on his ice on the floor, and you're not sure if you need to use a forward move like your medium or heavy to try and get the point and out of the situation. But oh, he has this dive kick and this uppercut on Gat. Might be better to just neutral jump or something. It definitely... Blue adds a level of risk assessment that I think the other two, while they do an okay job of, he does an extra good job of.
Noting similarly that while most of the time you can expect that Hit and Gohan are going to miss with their supers, Goku Blues is a little faster, and due to various aspects of his movement, tends to come out at a time you're more likely to be not expecting it, retreating it, or trying to come in at it. The others still have that opportunity to hit you when you're trying to come in, but for whatever reason, at least with this version of Bot, it doesn't seem to happen as often. Possibly different startups, or just general flow. Fortunately, Goku also tends to use up the EX. Use up the meter with EX options so much faster that you don't really have to deal with the super too much. But if you're doing particularly well, it often implies that the bot is not doing that well, relative to staying out of your way or whatever. And you may not end up in that situation. He does convert better than they do overall though. Whereas Bardock generally doesn't convert well, and regular Super Saiyan Goku definitely doesn't convert well. So, even if you have the choice of all 3 but don't feel comfortable with Goku Blue at first, you can upgrade to him later when you realize this is starting to feel easy. Similarly, as you get better and better, you can go ahead and finish more of your combos. But you should also be aware that you shouldn't worry that much. Most of the combos in question, as long as you don't go into super, and in some cases even if you go into level 1 for many characters, if you aren't like using a full down trip using all of your characters, you generally don't end up beating up the opposing team so much that you will definitely have to worry about running out of their health before you get your point. And since so much of it somehow turns out to be blue damage a lot of the time, the recognition of this and the skill to hit them with Dragon Rush and throw them out makes this one of our easier bots when it comes to keeping the opponent alive long enough to get anything. But these strings don't tend to go too long, so let's try to keep on track and therefore switch to Kanzuki Dynasty's team and switch to Bardock rather than Goku Blue. Bardock does not necessarily benefit or suffer from having Action 5 recording on in this case. He does ping a lot more, but in this specific situation we're using Bardock because we specifically want to put more pressure on someone who wants to hit buttons. And we're therefore going to be assessing the difference between Action 5 being on and Action 5 being off for people who have this issue. For Bardock specifically, we know what happens with Goku regular Super Saiyan form. He basically becomes less useful. If you don't have Bardock and you are an impatient player, definitely leave the Action 5 input off when doing this, because you will be using Goku Super Saiyan form and it's not very helpful there. But we will start on this side with what we've been watching up to this point, with again Action 5 being off. So that Bardock will not be using his special attack too often. Now in this case, we obviously have the glory of Kid Buu's stand medium. And this would seem as if it's most likely just going to solve all situations, but part of why this bot still works, regardless of this, is the characters involved. Hit is actually capable of functioning in that situation. Bardock is capable of functioning in that situation. Only Team Gohan has any real problem dealing with Kid Buu's 5M. Sure, it's easier to get the point, relatively speaking, but since Kid Buu also has slower responses to particular things, he can't stay out of trouble as easily. Which, at least in this case, helps out a lot for setting up these situations. Bardock is functional and effective as both a character that works when he's in as point to make you want to hit buttons and then suffer for it, and he has a little bit of helpfulness as an assist that the others don't quite have, as very buttonsy people might manage to completely evade certain things that Goku Blue does, or they'll just get too many points on Goku Blue because he moves in a particular way and he doesn't tend to attack too linearly all of the time. Bardock's relatively linear approach also helps to make Team Gohan's flying kick into something that approximates to a left-right mix-up soon after he finishes. So even though he doesn't have it, you still get a little something out of it. This furthermore helps with hits ice, because moving forward out of the ice is difficult no matter who hit calls. But moving forward out of ice into the air, or doing nothing in particular, is no issue for the most part. It's those players who want to move forward by attacking head-on that have to worry about Bardock's assist. This is still basically just as functional with Super Saiyan Goku, but a lot more visually distinctive on Super Saiyan Goku, and sometimes you don't want that. You want it to feel confusing and stressful so that that weakness as a player, that tendency to hit too many buttons, is triggered because there's not something so easy to recognize on screen at that moment. While it can be relatively easy to get the points for the stand heavy, it can also be really stressful if the opponent decides to go in relatively hard on you themselves. In short, between luck and the general feelings that come from being stressed out, if you rely on the stand heavy points, you're likely to manage some days and not manage other days. This is actually why it's going to probably be the point system that disappears first, i.e. you will stop getting points for doing this if you decide to go anywhere beyond the easy version defined for the bot. This isn't to say that you should ever stop doing it though, just that you shouldn't count any points for it. It's good to have that as a reaction to all sorts of things, as stand heavy is usually one of the best ways to convert into big damage possible, more or less in the game. From the other side, recognizing that, hey, I hit too many buttons, I should slow down. It's good from the sense of preventing yourself from getting caught in Bardock stuff. But it also forces you to experience the other side of the game, to recognize how much space and speed control you are ending up giving up when you aren't constantly hitting buttons. And therefore get used to the downsides of this. It's not just immediately, well, I stopped hitting buttons, now things are better. Things are not necessarily better, things are different, and you have to learn to recognize and accept that different, or you'll just end up going back to it as soon as you realize you find you're losing, and it feels like you're losing because you're standing too still. Once again, noting as you get better, or even as you've gotten close to realizing, I can't possibly win this time, I haven't gotten enough points, my character's too low on health or whatever. You can still practice some of your conversions off these situations, and do bigger combos. After all, no need to give up entirely if you've already lost. You can keep yourself in practice mentally by doing the combos you need until you've reached the end of the interaction and you can start over trying to get points again. This is similar to the reason why we tell you, sometimes just go ahead and use the Banish even if at the current difficulty level it's not gaining you points, because it's good to sometimes have that as the concept. This is particularly useful when the opponent has knocked you really high into the air, for example, and you want to quickly get back to the main field and continue to play normally. The other thing that only Bardock can do well is to act as Hit's distracting shadow. There are definitely movements and timings in which Hit can make attacks where if he calls Bardock at the exact moment, you absolutely will lose track of Hit if you were not able to distinguish the two characters from each other really easily. And while we're not necessarily saying that there are a bunch of people out there playing this team, there are similar capacities available to Hit and even a couple of other characters where they have a move that will make them vanish in some way, and if they happen to call an assist of a similar visual style at basically the same time, it can just be an outright visual mix-up. So we're adding that in as well. But you can count on Bardock for his relentlessness and crazy with punishes and forcing you to stand block a bunch of things. But above all, the realization is supposed to be, if I keep hitting buttons, I will keep on getting hit because of the character. Then occasionally you'll realize, wait, I'm not getting hit. That's not an immediate marker to hit more buttons, and Bardock is good at teaching you that. Try not to be too binary in it, and when the decision has to be made, try to make it as quickly as possible and not just autopilot into doing it. For some characters, simply using their auto combo in certain situations is the best option they've got in this. And there's functionally nothing wrong with this if that happens to be the strongest main option your character has there. You should not feel when using this bot, I shouldn't auto combo. What you are looking for is moments where it's very difficult to get anything good or to finish things from the auto combo because you happen to hit the medium at max range. In most of these cases, your stand heavy will still hit, but the medium auto combo will not go in the way that it's usually supposed to. There are even some characters for whom this is not true, and for those characters, just do your thing. It really does not matter. For them, you still have to worry about what happens when the opponent happens to be in the air a little bit. Most of the time anyway. So you still have to do just as much work, just at different times. Since there are very few characters in the game besides, I think, Cooler, who have difficulty doing the auto combo, difficulty landing their crouch heavy, and difficulty landing their stand heavy. Cooler does have some situations where all of those things are difficult. But even then, just use the easiest one. And learn to recognize the situations in which the easiest one is not serving the purpose you need. One other thing you can use it to learn, again not directly related to points, but still really useful to know, is how exactly far away you can stand to make certain of your opponent's moves whiff entirely. You can also learn to react to this over time, but just knowing when they will whiff is useful. This can lead to you either learning when they're likely to go for a riskier move, based on having whiffed before and not wanting to happen again, or if they're not that type of player, where you can deal them a lot of damage because they keep on whiffing. It is also slightly helpful that most of these characters have very slightly different crouch heavy animations, meaning that you can't count on any given tell, such as leaving the ground, as the thing you're supposed to use to tell you to hit your stand heavy. His ground ice attack is also unblockable, basically, meaning that you will never feel safe even when you are actually trying to space yourself correctly. This is compounded by the fact that he's most likely to do this move around the same time as he's calling an assist. And the assist is in turn distracting, making it more likely that you'll get caught by the floor ice. But let's talk about the point about punishing supers. Since his team has good EX moves and are likely to use up meter relatively slowly, you're going to see a lot of supers. Basically, the EX moves lead into things, meaning that they're more likely to keep going rather than getting deflected or stopped or end up on their back and back into a cycle where they're likely to use the move quickly again. But because they're also relatively easy to block and often need to be blocked for relatively long periods, they build up more meter by attacking than many other bots without necessarily using it. If you happen to get hit by their mediums or whatever, the auto combo might finish you off. But that's just part of the difficulty of the bot in terms of damage. Overall, it becomes fairly easy to learn when we think the medium will hit and we're wrong, and furthermore to learn the danger of moving into the position where we can try to hit with it, relative to characters as fast as these. However, it is valid to use a jump to approach. You will not learn anything if you attack from the air to do this, but let's change the parameters a bit and have Panzuki Dynasty able to go into her favorite place and at least go into the air to get closer before doing the stand medium. This is particularly likely to happen when she's relatively far out and needs to get back into spacing. These characters have strong corner carry and a lot of good reasons to fly around the place, so you might see it sooner rather than later. The problem being that the other thing that happens with fighting this sort of character is that you start to feel as if the time you spend hanging in the air is actually really long, and this is because functionally it is. Most of the time, we are used to an opponent who is unable to make a strong attack on us as we come down. They could try, but they'd most likely get blocked, risk getting hit by our falling heavy attack or whatever. But we learned fairly early that this is not applied to Team Gohan, and it definitely doesn't apply to hit. Bardock also doesn't always care. Goku Blue cares a little bit. But for the most part, if you've decided, I'm going to approach you by jumping, just to get closer and not have to deal with your ground stuff, and then go for my medium or whatever, you'll find that against this team, it's not that it won't pay off, but you have to be way better at it mentally than you normally were. They also have a strong tendency to move out of the space they were in, meaning that even if you went in with that intention, you can't be very sure that they'll be exactly where you aimed at when you decided to jump in the first place.
Yes, this is quite difficult relative to what I'm accustomed to. Either because they're never there, or... well, basically all the reasons you just described.
You can get some benefit out of attempting the instant air dash style of movement to resolve this, but then you're running the gauntlet of assists. This is a still not bad thing though. It's not we're saying don't do this. In fact, rather exactly the opposite. If you can see a moment where they have just used their assist and you haven't been hit because you were far away, and decide this is the moment I'm going to jump to get close to you, then jump. Just be careful if it's hit you're facing, because there's still a huge chance he just won't be there. Compound all that with, again, the quote-unquote requirement that you somehow manage to Dragon Rush the opponent and knock them out in order to keep them alive long enough to get all your points. And you end up learning a lot more about this spacing than you think. While you may be tempted to Super Dash, and we can't even say that it wouldn't work, this isn't really the bot against whom that is best tested. You can try it and see what it does, if it happens to help you. But the main problem with that is, players are more likely to be able to counter this move. Super dashes are a very strong option for a different type of situation, even at the higher than beginner levels. And we will in fact be demonstrating some of that toward the end of the stream. We'll be looking at a different team and attempting to super dash in on them. That's a preview for our bot form for next week. But for now, we're going to go to the final comparison and turn back on Action 5 in this config. Turning Action 5 back on with this particular group mostly slows them down. Hit will just randomly do a ton more countering in positions where it's not really helpful to him. Gohan will become harder to hit because he'll be in the air a lot doing his downward blasts. And Bardock just generally doesn't have as good pressure or anything. So why might you ever want to do this? One of the main reasons is at the higher level of play. If you are aiming to get points on the higher level of the bot, where the stand heavy is not supposed to be giving you points, and where you actually have to confirm the 5M every time, this is likely to make you more hesitant about hitting that 5M, and in at least Team Gohan and Bardock's case, can change the way you interact with the character when you hit it. It also constantly changes the range at which you stand and the range at which you're safe to attack for all of them, meaning you are often pushed back just enough that you have to rethink your situation. Now, against this particular team, your actual better option when they're doing this is to find some way to attack from the air yourself, or ignore it for relatively long periods, especially if you have the life lead. This means that if you have Action 5 on, you should be doing it from the perspective of, I'm trying to learn this. Because if you just use it in the standard way, it's more likely you'll just see more openings and see more ways of doing it and think, oh, this is easy. But if you have specifically decided, okay, I'm going to definitely try to focus on the 5M to get the points, I'm going to focus on making sure I confirm something out of it. And if you are specifically looking to watch for when that doesn't pan out the way you expect, or something else, then you can turn on the Action 5 and use that to learn while still trying to get the points in more or less the same way. If you find that your characters either really have no problems with this because all of their conversions out of it are easy or their auto combos are easy, there's really no reason to turn on 5 at all, as it's unlikely to help you develop any specific skills. But there's actually a good example in Boo's auto combo, where things look as if they will work exactly as they normally work, but there is a specific spacing where if you are using Boo's auto combo, the very last part of it does not work as expected, i.e. the combo into the super. The same thing happens with Gohan to some extent, although it's much harder to recognize when this is going to happen or not happen. So you can decide if you consider that important to learn on this character. You can definitely go through most of the auto combo and then look for some tell that things are not going to go as you expect and switch at the very end. But for the most part, you don't have that long. Obviously, if you've hit most of the auto combo and you're the type to mash buttons, chances are you'll have physically put in one more input even if you didn't intend to. And that's what you're going to get. Fortunately, Gohan has a big lunge in his, meaning that it's unlikely that he'll miss entirely under most circumstances. Usually it has to do with your opponent having been barely off the ground, and a weird interaction with the second hit. The lunge still happens, but the opponent is slightly differently spaced at the time it does, and similar. So, everything I've said will be condensed down into the page at 2-mk.org. Again, we're not absolutely sure what we're going to call this one, but you can find it when it's released, links to it directly, and now that navigation is upgraded, you should be able to navigate to it by just going to the website at 2-mk.org and looking for it as needed. This is an advanced bot form and therefore is functionally actually the hardest one we've made so far, as we got used to using the research in different ways. So while this is the one we intend to release this weekend, you can find it on Sunday approximately around 6 or 7 Eastern. Our demo, i.e. our preview of next week's, is a bit of a different matter. So, once again, this is one where, unlike this one where the DLC required is at least the one you can just buy after a while, let's switch our characters a bit. And this is going to be less of the ease of it. So we are switching to, in the second slot we need base Goku. First slot is actually Tenshinhan. We're considering whether or not we want to refactor this at this point, so I mentioned the second as first because that's the way it is in my head. Sorry about that for it generally being confusing. And the third character is regular Super Saiyan Goku. So, one quick preview, about 10 minutes worth. If you want to help us test out this one, let us know what you find. This one actually has some specific settings for actions and the timings of those actions that do not match up with the norm. And you may need to remember that if you're messing around with different bots, when to change it back, when not to, and so on. So you might want to write this down if you are actually planning to help out directly. We'll be changing action 3 to 20% and action 4 also to 20%. Action 5, as usual, can be either on or off. For the purposes of this, we will be turning it off. Even though it can help somewhat with base Goku, it's best if we don't demo it that way for the preview. All others are as normal, and we're going straight in. At the moment, this is the one we mentioned about learning when to super dash and why to super dash. Your goal, therefore, is fairly simple: super dash. But obviously, just super dashing blindly all the time is not likely to deal a lot of damage or do too much. The main reason this is important and the reason why this team is useful for it is because the way they move and the buttons they use, while they're not necessarily likely to make you unable to super dash, they are likely to make you change your timing or end up with your super dash hitting but not in the position you necessarily expected. So you're free to do it. And we don't expect you to miss, honestly. But the system isn't really going to be about can you make contact with the super dash. It's rather learning to recognize in that moment of contact which way to do your combo, which combo to do, whether or not your opponent blocked in a way that you're not used to and you have to do a certain mix-up. You can already see that for whatever reason, Tenshinhan in particular is really problematic when it comes to this. This in turn gives us the feeling, okay, I can make my super dash better if I start it from this space or do it at this time. And a lot of the timing and spacing you end up wanting to use is, quite frankly, wrong. But overall, the purpose of this form of the bot is to teach you super dashing may not be a solution to your problems if your opponents are often in aerial recovery from moves that were otherwise good. So they're going to be mostly doing moves that are good at stopping you from super dashing. But when they fail, or when they just randomly do these moves too early, and you happen to super dash, you also can't get much damage. And sometimes you may drop your combo entirely. Therefore, if you're testing this week for us, please pay attention to when you can and cannot get good combos or good conversions off your super dash. Some characters obviously will have a really easy time with it, and some will not. And of course, we will also be coming up with more specific refinements to the Imagine point systems we have so far. I won't mention them because they may change or be refined to the point where it isn't helpful, or we may get some information from a viewer who plays a relatively unorthodox character or team that found something really good that they can use it for, rather than the relatively generic stuff we've come up with so far. This bot is actually counted under our easy, and as a result, no one should have too many problems testing it out and get an idea of what they want to do with it. You can also pay attention to how much damage you manage to do in these cases, because that's a large aspect of it. How much damage you can actually do off that super dash. While we're unlikely to require you to watch and check for that specifically, you should generally be aiming for a certain amount of it. And therefore recognizing when you have not managed to get much because the super dash hit in a way you didn't expect, or you just aren't really used to converting off super dash damage in this situation in the first place. The bot will tech out in nearly any direction it needs to. So you don't have to worry about being able to do this too easily because it always techs the same way or anything like that. Since all of the inputs that generally deal with that are still on, it will also tend to use more EX moves, which is partly the point here, as we want it to use those EX moves so that it will be in weird situations and positions. So you're going to see a lot more EX moves and quite a few less supers. At least in terms of frequency, the supers will be coming out less often. So we're hoping that this is able to help you recognize when you could improve the timings on your super dashes. And if you can't necessarily because of the matchup, let's say, you could instead understand how much damage you can or cannot get, and don't overcommit or try to get something that puts you in danger unnecessarily for some measly amount of damage that probably wouldn't have made too much difference in the match. relative to whatever risk you took to get it. Learning decent setups after super dashes like that, i.e. where you couldn't get much damage but you did land a hit, is also a useful thing to learn. If you're familiar with jump cancel combos, there's some extra stuff you can work on in there too. But again, we're not going to be giving a whole bunch of specifics on potential point systems or anything. Just understand that your goal is to super dash and watch your conversions, watch your interactions, figure out what comes out of this. If you do not have the DLC required for using base Goku for this, Super Saiyan Vegeta is a decent option and Android 16 is a different decent option, depending on if you find yourself to be the sort of person that doesn't like to be on the ground, in which case you should generally use 16. And if you find yourself as a defensive player often on the ground until you have seen something to super dash at, then Vegeta is your option. We will of course be testing this weekend. And you should see something more on it next Friday. Between now and then, however, you can join us on Monday for our mishmashing Street Fighter V Battle Lounge, and on Tuesday for our Guilty Gear Zard Rev 2 Battle Lounge, the Tuesday train. Note that these are mostly US East Coast lounges. Depending on netcode and what connections, you may not want to join them, but we don't generally tend to restrict it too much, so you can still give it a try if you are in the Midwest area, Caribbean area, most of Canada, and so on. Europe, you can try if you have really good internet. Especially in the UK, that tends to work out. On Wednesday, we'll be having one more round of Sandai Casuals XL with Amara playing Hyde in Under Night in Birth EXE latest. And on Thursday, we'll be looking at Kame House, once again, our Dragon Ball FighterZ beginner lobby, where we will probably be looking into what we have managed to improve based on our work with the bot, even though we're not pushing all that seriously yet with it. And of course, once again, Friday will be yet, as mentioned, another disc guidance to bring us back around. So, we hope that this has been helpful. Once again, this will be released on Sunday at 6 or 7 or somewhere in between there, Eastern Time. You can watch our Twitter account 2_MK_FGC for the tweet that will announce when this bot's full information is available. But as you don't have to use any inputs, you could just use this stream and get started right away if you want. This has been Rillian along with Kansuki Dynasty and Just Fine on the controller to help for Team 2MK. Enjoy your training, and good night everyone.